Some sort of updates about what's going on in the world of esports and Saudi Arabia and kind of where we're at now in terms of working with these oil-producing Arabic theocracies that don't have, well, you know, at least I was told, didn't have sort of compatible values in esports, but they do have compatible fucking money, evidently. People have essentially decided that we're going to turn a blind eye to the things that we rail against that aren't even happening in the West because the people that are producing the money in the Middle East, even though they do those terrible things, we're just going to sort of let it lie and regurgitate this myth that eventually will change them. They'll change. They'll come around to our way of values, even though a lot of the values are tied to their religion in a theocracy. So that's kind of where we're at. But unfortunately, we've lost. There's no winning the battle. And so I've been telling people to watch out for what's going on with these Saudi sponsorships. Because you'll recall that we did briefly prevent NEOM. NEOM is one of these, what they're calling mega projects in Saudi Arabia. And NEOM is going to be essentially a new high-tech city created for, tourists essentially to go to and do things. But it's just going to be this sort of, high-tech, fantastical. It's going to be meant to be like super environmental, efficient city that people can go and live at. It's being built on land stolen away from the Huwatat tribe and all of this other stuff. Anyway, it sponsors Formula One. It sponsors a ton of stuff. But when that sponsorship came to esports, everyone went, no, we're not doing it. Everyone kicked up a stink, and Blast lost their NEOM sponsorship, and Riot Games turned around and said, no, we're going to have to get rid of it as well, because the optics of us announcing it during Berlin Pride Month, when our studios are in Berlin, it's pretty bad, actually. And even though the NA office said, you didn't do anything wrong with that, the broadcast team sort of managed to get a W. We got a little mini victory. Anyway, fast forward now, and there are other multiple mega projects that are coming in. I want to just sort of give you a little bit of I looked up a list of what's happening, and there's one in particular that you need to be mindful of. But I'm just going to show you a list of these Saudi Arabian. They're not even called mega projects anymore. I think they're Giga Projects. This is everything you need to know about Saudi Arabia's Giga Projects. And this is the one at the top. It's called Kadia. We're going to be talking about that in just a moment. But this is a multi-billion-dollar entertainment destination set to be the world's largest entertainment city that will surpass Walt Disney World in Florida. This is created by the Kadia investment company, the QIC. And it's going to have more than 300 facilities, including theme parks, water parks, a city entirely dedicated to sports. And just to give you an idea of it, Kadia was awarded a $750 million construction contract for its first water park, the first in Saudi Arabia. It's going to be home to 22 rides and attractions as part of their master plan to have it. These are some artistic mock-ups. Falcon's Flight will dominate the skyline at Kadia. Can't wait for some crossover with Falcon's esports. It says here, Saudis like thrills. Six Flags Kadia will be family-oriented park with something for everyone, but it will definitely be geared towards the younger crowd. Our research shows that Saudis like thrills and like to go fast. Kadia's president of Parks and Attractions said, yeah, they like thrills. They do like thrills. NEOM was another one of these Giga projects. This one obviously going back as far as 2017. And this one's a bit more serious because obviously you'll have seen the video for The Line, which is a zero carbon city with sort of buildings that are all stacked up on each other like a Rubik's puzzle. It's going to have a mountain resort, a ski resort. It's going to have all this stuff. They're building some fucking islands and shit out in the Red Sea. They want like this. They want to create a sustainable tourist dedication. They're building something called Coral Bloom. You've got this, Russian, which is one for urban communities. Daria, you got this giant new city being built. Amala, they're spending all this money. And one of the sponsors for a lot of these esports events coming up is a real estate company that's taking its money from the PIF and helping build some of these mega projects. But the thing you need to keep an eye out for is Kadia, because while people were a bit resistant to Neom, spoiler, they won't be the second time that comes to esports. Kadia is now going to be the big esports focus. They're going to make it this city of entertainment. And they announced in Arab news it's going to have its own gaming and esports district. And you can see it's a short article. Developers of the Kadia mega project, they're behind the times. It's just they're calling it a mega project. Get with it. It's a Giga Project now. In Riyadh, announced the launch of the site's gaming and esports district on Thursday, the Saudi press agency reported. The Kadia investment company said it wanted to make Kadia a global center for gaming and esports and hoped to attract some of the biggest names in the sector from around the world. The gaming and esports sector is one of the fastest growing. Oh, yeah, it's definitely not shrinking at the moment or anything. And we can see the ambitious plans of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to advance it. Our role will be to host major events and tournaments by developing the infrastructure so that Kadia City can invite the world to live, learn, and compete in gaming and esports. The Gaming and Esports District is not only for esports professionals, but rather for gaming enthusiasts of all levels and ages. The district turns the world of gaming into a tangible reality. This area will be the place where the gaming community feels welcome. The district will be split into 4 distinct sections, focused around a main stadium with a capacity for 73,000 spectators, and the largest indoor LED screen among all esports arenas in the world. It's going to be like a sort of copy of that one in Vegas. The district will also host up to 25 esports clubs from around the world to live, train, and compete. 25 esports clubs from around the world having access to a Saudi Arabian state-of-the-art training facility. Bit weird. The district will welcome leaders of the gaming and esports sector and will provide regional headquarters to more than 30 leading video games development companies, the report added. Now, obviously, earlier on in the stream, I talked about what we're kind of looking at. We've looked at all the players. We know ESL are getting fucked a little bit by Valve in the sense that Valve aren't going to allow them to keep the Louvre agreement and have a partnered ESL Pro League anymore. Not that it really matters, because ESL don't need the money, because ESL got bought by the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund owned Savi Games Group. They merged with Faceit. And now what we're starting to see is, as I said was going to happen, we're now starting to see the Saudi money trickle down and get into the hands of the organizations themselves. It's not just Falcons. They're not just going to want to have Falcons. It's great to have a Saudi Arabian locally run, identified org for the obvious reasons. It gives the locals something to cheer for and higher engagement. But ultimately what they want to do is they want to put as much money into as many people's hands as possible so they have total dominion and total control over the esports scene. And when you see in a report that 25 esports clubs from around the world are going to be living and training out in Kadia, this is something separate to the Saudi Arabian World Cup in Riyadh. This is something else. And as I said, what I'm hearing is they are looking to essentially recreate WESA again. WESA was ESL's World Esports Association. And what they're looking to do is essentially have a Saudi-funded, I should say, partnership where all these teams are essentially competing across all of the ESL and Intel Extreme Masters events. Now, that's all I really know at this moment in time, but it just shows the kind of the spread, the sprawl of the Saudi money and how little anyone really cares about taking the Saudi money. And to underline that point, I want to show you a piece of work by a Norwegian journalist called Erik Fossum. And Erik Fossum, you won't have heard his name, he's new. But journalists reach out to me all the time, and they say, hey, listen, don't know how you've done it for as long as you have, but, I'm writing about esports now, and just want to say your work's been helpful, you're an inspiration, blah, blah, blah. Right? And it's always nice. And so when I see journalists doing good work, I love to see their work. People send me their work and say, hey, could you talk about this on a stream? Or, what do you think of this? Could you, blah, blah, blah. So Erik Fossum, this Norwegian journalist, sent me a piece he did. Now, again, it's in Norwegian, obviously, so I will have to read a translation. You won't be able to see the words on screen. The article is entitled Norway Z, because Erik was nice enough to send me a translation. Norway Z Esports Federation, we talk a lot with Saudi Arabia. Now, in his reporting, he highlights that actually the federation, which was the Norwegian Esports Federation, which was founded in 2019, has had already a lot of controversies. It's only been going since 2019, and he said the controversies include a scandal involving betting sponsorships, chaos when the board insisted on hosting the Norwegian Esports Championships at venues operated by homophobic religious organisations, and an agreement that lets the military recruit all Norwegian Esports Federation tournaments, right? So I'm like, yeah, that's all of the boxes ticked. That's what everyone's doing. So, and by the way, it looks like Erik's reported on all of these things. So, like, Erik is like Norway's Richard Lewis. So, like, yeah, fuck your life, I guess. Anyway, the whole purpose of this piece was they interviewed the representative, the person you can see in the picture, which is the Norwegian Esports Federation president, Ellen Yu-Young Moen. And she sat down for an interview with Erik and what's going to happen moving forward for them working with Saudi Arabia, and what does it mean for people that might have issues with that, etc. Well, some of the answers to this are so illuminating and so blunt. Erik expressed surprise. He said, I sent them a copy back and said, this is what we're going to run. And they were like, yeah, fine. And he's like, I couldn't believe it because the answers are like so fucking bad. And I was like, when I read it, I was like, oh yeah. No one is a fan of Saudi Arabia, right? No one is a fan of Saudi Arabia. Erik pointed out that the Norwegian Esports Federation was quick to condemn Russia, but now that more esports events are being hosted in Saudi Arabia, a country with ongoing human rights issues, where does the federation stand in this debate? No one is a fan of Saudi Arabia as a state, plain and simple, answers Moen. But as long as there are actors working for change, we can accept some level of cooperation. But Saudi Arabia as a state itself is not a positive thing. And then Erik asks, who are these actors? She says, the Saudi Arabian Esports Federation is trying to make changes. They probably also walk a fine line with what they can say internally in the country. Prince Faisal, pictured, now the head of both IESF and the Saudi Arabian Esports Federation, is a member of the royal family governing the entire country. However, the ties between the state and the federation run deeper than simple family connections. Saudi Arabia's leader and Prime Minister Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is the chairman of the Savvy Games Group, the gaming arm of the country's investment fund. They own esports companies like DreamHack, ESL and Faceit, and are deeply involved in tournaments run by the Saudi Arabian Esports Federation. Through ESL, broadcasts and qualifiers for Gamers 8 are produced, which bin Salman has announced will be the next year's World Championship in esports. All of this is part of bin Salman's ambitious Saudi Vision 2030 plan, aiming to diversify the country away from oil dependence by 2030, which includes goals for, among other things, infrastructure and entertainment. The project has faced international criticism for forcing people from their homes in areas where new cities are being built and issuing death sentences to those opposing the plans. That's Neom particularly. The country is also accused of severe human rights violations, using imprisonment and torture against dissidents and activists. Bin Salman is personally implicated in the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Moen dismisses this connection, stating, Prince Faisal is far removed in the royal family. And Erik says, has the Norwegian Esports Federation been in contact with Saudi Arabia? And she says, yes, we talk a lot with them, both with Prince Faisal and Princess Al Jahara, who oversees all of the women's project. Princess Al Jahara is working to promote women in esports and establish women's leagues, according to Moan. One reason I personally find that they are doing positive is that Prince Faisal personally came to me and said, Ellen, you must talk to Princess Al Jahara. She is a woman and understands women's issues. I cannot dictate what women say and what they need. This has led to a dialogue between Moan and the princess to continue the work she says has brought female players, commentators and fans into the esports industry in the country. Right. Fast forward a little bit. We haven't hit the worst part. We're about to. Right. That title's just unlimited funds. The fact that Saudi Arabia is buying up everything within esports is problematic, Moan explains, disliking the notion that this is done to improve the country's reputation. They have unlimited funds. They can just go to their government and say, I want 50 million to organise the World Championship. They're gaining a monopoly because they're willing to spend the money. Eric asks, is this centralisation that's happening now unfortunate? And she says, it's unfortunate from a commercial perspective and not good for the industry's development. Healthy competition fosters growth. When they monopolise, we fear it will stagnate growth. The right people don't care, so we end up in this situation. And then Eric says, so it's like if you're not with Saudi Arabia, you're not in esports. And she says, yes. And he says, that's the strategy? ? She says, it's the 2030 strategy. It's all about making money. We also hope for international pressure so that at some point they realise they need to change. Eric asks, if there wasn't so much money in the region, would you still be interested in collaborating with Saudi Arabia? And she says, yes. And he says, so it's not just the money. And she says, no. It's about who is genuinely interested in doing something good for esports, the children and youth, regardless. And so he jumps ahead and says, why doesn't the Norwegian Esports Federation have a stance on Saudi Arabia like you do with Russia? And she says, with Russia, a specific IESF rule was broken. As I said, that's the International Esports Federation. As I said, we can criticize Saudi Arabia as a state for what they're doing. We have to. Eric asks, can you do that while embracing Saudi Arabia's esports initiatives? And she says, yes, it's the same as it was in Norway. How long did it take for LGBTQ marriage to be legal in Norway? How long did we have to work for that? Back then, we had to criticize the Norwegian state for characterizing homosexuality as a disease. And Eric goes, but Norway didn't kill those who criticized it, though. And she goes, yeah, they didn't. But it still means that those fighting against it with the means they have, even if there's a risk of being beheaded or falling downstairs, in air quotes, those trying their best to create change, we must support. Prince Faisal and Princess Al Jahara have always been clear and honest with the international delegates from the Federation about this. Eric says, but can we trust that what they're saying is true? And she says, as much as we can trust anyone else who says something in the International Federation. He then asks the question, it's illegal to be gay in Saudi Arabia. How can Norway's Esports Federation ensure that gay esports athletes travel to the World Championship in Riyadh, aren't imprisoned or killed? And she replies, several delegates from the International Federation who are part of the LGBTQ community aren't worried about this. And Eric goes, not worried? People are in prison today, being tortured today for being gay. And she goes, well, they're not personally worried when travelling to Riyadh. And then Eric goes again and he says, in 2019, there was a mass execution where several individuals were convicted of being gay. But the Federation isn't worried about the safety of gay people. And then she says, well, not our own personal safety. No, we're not. And he goes, but what about the athletes? Isn't the Norwegian Esports Federation worried that gay and transgender people might drop out of esports completely? Because the end goal is a tournament or world championship in Saudi Arabia where their existence is illegal. She replies, Prince Faisal talks to us about precisely this, that his goal is to include and normalise LGBTQ in esports in the country. Eric goes, let me rephrase. Are there no limits? should we work with those who openly kill gay people? She replies, I feel we must work to get them to change perspective, with pressure either internally from their own people, the youth waking up and taking power, or from the international community. They will have to change sooner or later. It's important that we put pressure on them, that we, who are part of the LGBTQ, show up and say it. And then Eric says, sanctions are a tool that are being used in sports, such as excluding Russia from the Olympics. This is the opposite of what you're saying. And she goes, the Saudi Arabian Esports Federation hasn't done the same as the Russian Esports Federation. And then he goes, but why is it Russia should not participate? We want nothing to do with them. But for Saudi Arabia, we say we must influence them from within. And she goes, buckle up. It's because Russia has been clear they don't want progression. They don't want change. They want to stick to the old ways. And Eric goes, but Saudi Arabia claims to seek progression, but they still are arresting and torturing and executing people. And so she says, we must not confuse Saudi Arabia as a state and the Saudi Arabian Esports Federation. Eric goes, but it's the state that's pulling the strings here. Is it possible to separate the two? Who is paying for the World Championship? It's not the Esports Federation. She then goes, and you'll like this, Jace and the Finns. She says, if Finland was a malevolent country, they too would be 90% financially supported by their government. Eric goes, I don't see the comparison. She says, what the Saudi Arabian Esports Federation spends its money on is more or less under their control. And he goes, but is it? They are part of the 2030 plan. And she goes, absolutely they are. And that falls under what we call the sports washing problem. But the fact is, they are accomplishing things, and they are spending money on programs to include women, on programs to promote the mental and physical health of players. And Eric says, so you do think it's possible to separate the Esports Federation from the state? Yes, but it is a fine line, and it's crucial we remain skeptical and question everything that happens. But it's incredibly important we pressure the government, that we correctly pressure the Esports Federation to ensure they follow through on their promises. That's why it's important we show up there to put pressure on them. Because if I sit in Norway and say I'm boycotting them, they don't care about little Norway. But if I go there, and we are there as the Nordics, 5 countries together who openly support the LGBTQ movement and women, then we can ask them questions directly. And that, of course, will make a huge difference. I'll get to the last part, and it really just shows you how delusional everybody is. Yeah, here we go. It's with the picture of Ronaldo there. As we're wrapping up the interview, the Esports Federation says that Eric's publication Pressfire is invited to Saudi Arabia to meet with the members of the royal family. And Moan says they will get the royal family to pay for the trip. He says it's a shocking invitation, which we decline, not at least considering the country's history of silencing dissenters and journalists. I like this Eric guy. He's a good man. When Moan is reminded that it's been a few years since journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered on orders from the Crown Prince, and that this interviewer recently published a critical commentary on the regime, she responds with, oh damn, do you think they check that thoroughly? She asks. There are many in the International Federation who have opinions on all sorts of things. And Eric says, this is kind of what I was trying to ask earlier. It's not unlikely that get a Norwegian gay person or transgender person, they could get arrested for being themselves. That chance isn't zero, is it? And she goes, the chance isn't zero. No. And then it just says, however, she suggests that it would be an overreaction for gay or transgender individuals not to go, because it's unlikely that any of those travelling would be affected. She compared it to a situation from last month when the European Esports Federation considered making their General Assembly digital after incidents of stabbings in Paris and terror attacks in Belgium. We still chose to have a General Assembly in Paris despite this. So in other words, she has compared being a transgender or gay athlete traveling to Riyadh, a country where they criminalize you, she says if you don't go, it's the same as us not cancelling an event because of a terrorist attack, an unrelated, unrepeatable terror attack. Now, this is the new cool. This is the new justification from all of these esports federations, all of these companies to take the money. It's done. It's over. They'll say anything. And when you nail them down on it, they'll say, all right, you're right. But it doesn't matter, because if we're not here, we can't be in esports. And when you consider she is running an international esports federation that will be sending delegates to Riyadh, will be participating in these new World Cup qualifiers, will be participating because the Saudis have designs on using their influence to get esports into the Olympics and set themselves up as the head of the esports delegation for the Olympics. This is the shit they're going to say. And I'm telling you, by the way, and you're gonna see this very soon, everyone is going to be in on this. It's not just esports federations from small countries. Big games developers, all your favorite esports orgs, your favorite esports competitors, your favorite content creators. Listen, I'll never say a bad word against Hex, and I love Hex. I love Hector. You know that. You've seen me do his content. I've been his podcast. He's been on mine. But, he's out there and he's saying, the Crown Prince has such a nice smile. He seems like such a nice guy. Got a kind face. It's like that kind face has ordered the death of hundreds of political dissidents. Scump, another guy I fucking, really fuck with, really love. A guy I was hoping to get on the Richard Lewis show now that he's retired. I had beers with him last time I was in New York, and he's promoting the Saudi Arabian World Cup. And it's like, it's everyone. I mean, just to sort of end on something tangentially related, it's getting harder and harder for me to kind of like, I've said, I'll always go up against even my friends for doing stuff. And one of my this is like my esports hero. Like, this is the guy that made me want to be a manager. This is the guy that really kept me around in esports at the start. So, still love Jason. I'd take a bullet for Jason. I fucking love him dearly. He's like the OG. But when you look into, I heard the story, he's looking to reacquire Complexity from GameSquare, and I was like, yeah, this is how you get past all that conflict of interest bullshit. And fuck GameSquare and fuck being associated with FaZe. Jason Lake and the people that run FaZe, it's like night and day. On the one hand, you've got a passionate, principled man who sacrificed huge parts of his adult life to help create a model for esports that we can all use, because understand, the early progenitor esports organizations, they were all winging it. Nobody knew what worked. Nobody knew how to make money. Nobody knew how sustainable it was going to be. Jason was at the cutting edge of all of that business. FaZe Clan, the management over there are a bunch of chancers and fucking grifters that have constantly been involved in bullshit that discolors the whole industry to outsiders. They couldn't be further apart. And I was like, oh, that's great. And anyway, I was like reading this article and I was like, yeah, go on. And then it just said, sources told HLTV that Lake has been on a roadshow to attract investors to finance the acquisition of Complexity with recent trips to Dubai and Abu Dhabi. He was at the Etihad Arena during the final 2 days of the Blast Premier World Final, while Complexity's team competed at the ESL Challenger Atlanta. And so that's where the investment money's going to come from there. And if not there, it'll certainly come from Saudi. And so you have to understand, when you cannot now take, so I never want to hear again, by the way, about how, fucking Richard Lewis is unhireable or whatever. I wouldn't be hired by the Saudi state. I've made that abundantly clear. It's why now I can say, actually, fuck the esports fans and just focus on my community, my people that support my work. There is nowhere to go now. There really isn't. And the justifications you're going to hear, like that batshit Norwegian fucking Esports Federation interview, they are going to tell you to your face that, listen, if you're gay, if you're trans, just stop whining. Stop whining and go to Riyadh. That's what they're going to tell you. That's going to be the new stance. You know, the same people putting up pride flags in June are going to tell you, you are going to go to Riyadh and you are going to risk your well-being, your life. And what's going to happen, by the way, let's say somebody does get arrested. What happens then? Because you're not going to have the pull, little old Norway, of getting one of your athletes out of a Saudi Arabian jail. And then what's going to happen is we're going to get into some sort of international incident. And imagine I'm having to say this from esports, because this is how it works in real life. All right? I want people to remember, I don't know, does anyone remember the North Korean case with the American citizen? There was a guy called Otto Warmbier, I think his name was. And he got caught, he did like a minor act of vandalism. I think he was pulling a fucking poster down or something. And he got arrested and he got detained. And the American government negotiated his release. And he'd been beaten and fucked up so badly. By the time he got back, he died shortly after. And guess what? The press didn't make a big deal about it. A despotic regime in a foreign country essentially murdering an American citizen, which, you know, turns out you can do that. Ask Hamas. You know, a despotic regime in a foreign country killing an American citizen, but it turned out he was a Republican, so it was funny. And so the press didn't cover it, and nobody gave a shit. So what's going to happen in esports, by the way? What's going to happen in esports when, let's say, for example, somebody does get arrested for being gay or being trans, and instead of doing an 8-year prison sentence, they're just given lashes? We all going to be all right with that? We all going to be all right with a statement from a global esports federation saying, listen, they would have had to do 10 years, but thanks to the power and harmony of esports, they're just taking 40 lashes in public instead. And we're all going to have to eat that fucking plate of shit because, hey, you know, esports is so fucking good, right? Couldn't just let esports die rather than it be a fucking Saudi propaganda machine. This is what I mean. This is why I can't do esports as it is. And I want to exist mostly as an agent to destroy it. Or at least try and push back on it. Try and illuminate people. It doesn't have to be this way. You can say all you want about, but they've got the money, and if you don't accept it and you don't participate and you're not in the leagues and you're not in the tournaments, you don't have to be. You don't have to be. It's only if you want money, and it's only if you want success and status and fame, and you want to turn your org into an asset that you can sell or sell equity within it. You don't have to do any of those things. An esports org can just be a logo, your credit card, like-minded people entering tournaments for fun, and you try and build up a following from that. One of the people I'm going to be talking to, actually, on the Richard Lewis show very soon, and I'm going to reference them here, is going to be PPD from Nouns, because obviously Nouns are sort of, you know, they're a small NA org, but they're trying to be self-funded, and they're trying to do it without taking a Saudi bag or anything shady. You know, yeah, they got that Web3 tech in there that everyone's fucking dubious about, and we're going to talk about that. But at the end of the day, you know, they're the people now that I want to facilitate, because as far as I can tell, that, you know, like, and it's like these influencer esports orgs too, like Moist, they're not competing in these parts of the world. They're not doing it. They say they don't want to do it, and they don't have to do it. They can just make content and compete in online, you know, cups and stuff like that. But it's just getting ridiculous, the things we're going to say to justify all of this. And I've never seen a better illustration than that article Eric sent me. Like, I couldn't believe it. When I was reading it, I thought it must be a joke. I thought it was like so close to being satire. But that's where we're at. And as I said, watch this space as well. Kadia sponsorships are going to be everywhere. That's how they're going to get around it this time. And everyone's going to justify it. Everyone's going to say, yeah, good old Kadia.